Hey guys, it's Dakota from Cardropolis TCG. Today we're going to be doing a deck profile for modern Magic the Gathering. I haven't done one of these in a long time. Mostly I've been busy, but that's just a lazy excuse. Anyways, so this is the deck I've been kind of grinding a lot of recently. RCQ season number 3 just started, and this is the deck I want to play going forward. I think it's very powerful. It's very proactive, which is nice, but it does have a decent amount of like interaction to like answer your opponent's like stuff. But yeah, there was an RCQ this last weekend, so it's coming up a little bit late, but I got top 8. I didn't win, obviously, but you know, top 8's not bad. There's another RCQ this weekend. Me and my family are going over to the other side of Washington to play, so hopefully I do well there. I might make some changes, and I'll probably talk about that in the video. But this video will be designed for both like new and experienced players. If you just want the deck list, of course, you can just, you know, have the screenshot. But for those who actually want to learn about the deck, you might play it at some tournaments. It's not the most popular deck, but I do think it'll start popping up a little bit more here and there. Anyways, we'll get into it. This is Domain Zoo. It's a 5-color aggro mid-range deck. And yeah, it being 5 colors, you can pretty much play whatever you want within reason, I guess. Like, I play a ton of threats. You have removal, some counter magic, and then yeah. But yeah, we'll get started. First off, we got 4 Ragavan, Nimble Pilfer. Most red decks are playing Ragavan nowadays, unless you're like Burn, or some sort of like control strategy. For those who don't know, Ragavan, when it hits your opponent, you can exile the top card of their deck and you can play it for that turn. You also get a treasure token, so you can get some mana to play whatever cards are in their deck if you don't have it. We're 5 colors, so we can take a lot of things with Ragavan, surprisingly. You can also pay 2 mana to dash it, which means it gets haste, and then at the end of the turn it comes back to your hand, which can be, you know, against decks that have like sorcery speed removal. You can kind of play around that. You just hit them and runs away, you get a treasure token. Dodges Prismatic Ending, and I guess on the mirror match Tribal Flames or something, but there's not like a ton of mirror matches for this deck. But yeah, it's a good 1-drop. It's a little bit awkward because sometimes we want to go turn 1, get a tap land, turn 2, get Domain, which we'll get to the kind of complicated mana base a little bit later. But yeah, opening Ragavan and some other 1-drops allow you to go turn 1 spell, turn 2 double spell, which is one of the deck's like better starts. Next up, we got Wild Nacatl. It's another 1-drop for the deck. It's a 1-mana 1/1. If you have a plains and a mountain, it gets +1/+1 for each one. So turn 1, it's more than likely a 1/1 or a 2/2. But once you get to turn 2, you can fetch your other colors, and then you can swing for 3. So it's again a 3 damage creature, basically. Next up, we got Territorial Kavu. This one came out in Modern Horizons 2. This card is pretty sweet. I would say this is one of the better cards in the deck. It's 2 mana. It has Domain. It gets its power and toughness is equal to the number of basic land types you have along your lands. So turn 2, you can make it be a 5/5, which is a very aggressive creature. And then on attack, it has two abilities. You can choose one. You can exile a card from your opponent's graveyard, or you can discard a card and draw a card. So if you start flooding a little bit, you can discard some lands. If you want to keep your opponents off of things, like against Murktide, you can take their like instants and sorceries, or you can hit things to keep them off of Delirium, so it's harder for them to Unholy Heat you. Unholy Heat is pretty good against this deck if they have Delirium, because it kills all of our things for 1 mana. But you can only play 4 Unholy Heats in your deck, and we have more creatures than they have Unholy Heat, so that's fine. But yeah, being able to, against like Reanimator decks, hit their Reanimator targets. And then, of course, yeah, when you're flooding, discard lands and hope to draw more threats or spells, or burn to finish them off is good as well. You can also declare an attack, discard a card, draw a removal spell, and still before blockers kill their thing if you draw like a Leyline Binding or something. But one of my favorite cards in the deck, usually, depending on what I'm going against, if I'm going against like a combo control or like, I try to play this one. If I think they have removal, I try to play something else, so then this one will live and get me more value throughout the game. But if I don't think they have like a ton of like interaction, then you want to play this one first and start getting your looting going so you can start digging for whatever pieces of interaction you need specific for that matchup. Also really good at finding your sideboard cards. We do have blue in the deck, but we don't really have any card draw. So not being able to like draw like our sideboard cards as often as like say Murktide, for example, is a little bit of a downside, but Territorial Kavu can dig for those, so that's nice too. Next up, we got another relatively new card, probably newer than everything else, is Nishoba Brawler. It's a 2-mana star 3. It gets similar to Territorial Kavu, has domain, and gets power equal to the number of basic lands type you have. So at its best, it'll be a 5/3. It also has trample, which means if your opponent has like some tokens, they can't really favorably like block with them. They just still would eat damage. Also, if they block and you like Leyline Binding their creature to remove it, the trample still goes through, so that can deal like 5 damage, which is nice. It only has 3 toughness, so it does die to lightning bolt, which is unfortunate. So against decks that play a lot of lightning bolts, I do side some of them out in favor of better cards typically, just because we don't want to be trading 2 mana for their like 1 mana kind of thing. We still probably keep in like Nacatls and Ragavan against Bolt and just force them to have it, but yeah, Brawler is less good against Bolt. Next up for our domain creatures, we have Scion of Draco. This is also another Modern Horizons 2 card. It has domain. It costs 2 less for each land type you have. So if you have all 5, it only costs 2 mana. If you only have 4 colors, and then it costs 4 mana, and that's kind of not great, but it's still fine, but not ideal. But I think it's almost impossible to have 4 mana out and not have all of your colors. Well, I guess it's not impossible with my version, but it's very unlikely. Anyways, it has flying. It's a 4/4, so it can't be, while your bigger creatures can block the ground, you can fly over with Scions, which is pretty good. It also gives all of our creatures like effects. So depending on what color your other creatures are, they get an additional effect. So if it's white, it gets Vigilance. If it's blue, it gets Hexproof. If it's black, it gets Lifelink. If it's red, it gets First Strike. And if it's green, it gets Trample. So it doesn't do anything for like Nishoba Brawler because it already has Trample. But giving Tarmogoyf Trample can be good. Giving Territorial Kavu First Strike and Trample is pretty good. Also giving Ragavan First Strike so they can't block very well with like smaller things can happen. Also, there's just like a ton of text on this card, so if your opponent's just not paying attention, like I show them the card when I play it, but sometimes they forget all the things that it does, and they'll block like incorrectly, and then they end up getting kind of blown out just by not paying attention. So overall, pretty good card. If our opponent is playing a Blood Moon deck, which our deck is pretty weak against, I do end up siding these out, because if we do get Blood Mooned, even with our basics, we can only reduce the cost of this card by 6, which means it's a 6 mana, and that's just, we don't have enough lands to, if the game's going that long, we're probably losing. So that's one that I side out during Blood Moon matchups. And I guess our last creature, so this deck, there's some online results for this deck, and they're playing some other flex slots, but I decided to trade the flex slots and 1 land for Tarmogoyf. I just wanted another threat just to be more proactive game 1, and then in game 2 I can side out the threats that aren't as good for more interaction. But just game 1, I just wanted to play aggressively as possible. But Tarmogoyf is a 2-mana star 1, and it gets +1/+1 for each card type in either player's graveyard. So for us, we have a lot of the card types. We have, land, creatures, we have instants, we have sorcery, we have artifact, and we have enchantment. So we have pretty much all of them except for tribal. But yeah, it's just a big creature. It does rely on the graveyard, so if your opponent has like graveyard hate, that can be a little bit awkward. But for the most part, there's no other graveyard synergies in this deck. So if your opponent is bringing in like graveyard hate just for your Tarmogoyfs, then if you just don't draw your Tarmogoyfs and draw your other things, like their graveyard hate just kind of was a dead card and practically a free mulligan. So I think it kind of can bait people into oversighting sometimes. Yeah, overall, card's very good. Next up, we have our spells and interaction. We got 4 Lightning Bolt, 1 mana, deal 3 damage to any target. Good for killing creatures, good for going at face to finish off the game, killing planeswalkers. Just, Lightning Bolt's a good card. Next up, we got Stubborn Denial, which is a counter spell, 1 mana. Counter target non-creature spell unless they pay 1 extra mana. So if they tap out for something like Fable the Mirror Breaker or Indomitable Creativity, removal spells, iteration on turn 3 or something, you can get them with it. It also has, I believe it's Ferocious. Yeah, Ferocious. If any of our creatures have power of 4 or greater, it automatically counters the non-creature spell. And we have 4 creatures that meet that requirement most of the time. So Kavu is at minimum usually a 4/4. Same with Brawler, a 4/3. If we don't get a tap land and we get 4 of our colors with 2 fetches, if we have an aggro start, then that still works. Tarmogoyf sometimes early game, because we don't have Mishra's Bauble or like a ton of like cantrips early. Sometimes Tarmogoyf can be like a 3/4. So sometimes it doesn't quite work with Tarmogoyf. But mid to late game, it works very well with Tarmogoyf. But just nice having a main deck counter spell to just, sometimes that's all you really need. You're attacking with creatures, you're removing their things. They go for a game-winning spell and you just counter it, they're dead on board. So card's very good. Also, if you don't need it, you can always discard it with Territorial Kavu, which is nice. Next up, we got Leyline Binding. This is also a new card out of Dominaria. And it's a 6 mana enchantment. It also has domain, so it costs 1 less for each color we have. So most of the time it's a 1 mana. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you target 1 permanent, non-land permanent your opponent controls, and you remove it from play under this. So very versatile card. When I first saw it spoiled, some people were talking about putting it in control decks and everything. I'm like, that's fine. The Omnath decks or the 5-color Rhino decks, could be good with this. But immediately I thought that this instantly replaces Path to Exile in my old Zoo deck. So I definitely was like, this card's gonna be insane in this deck, and it is. It's a 1 mana remove anything. This card's been great. It is again awkward against Blood Moon because if they shut us off down to 3 colors, it costs way too much. But maybe if we just play our lands out, we might be able to get a Blood Moon with it or something. But yeah, nice card. Lastly, for our spells, we have a Sorcery, Tribal Flames, 2 mana, deal damage to any target equal to the number of basic land types we have. So ideally, it's a 2 mana, deal 5. Sometimes it could be 2 mana, deal 4. But it's great at finishing the game, which is mostly what it's there for. It can also kill things like, Ledger Shredder. Sometimes can get to be a 2/4, which is out of bolt range. 2/4 is still not great for blocking, but that thing can get pretty big pretty quickly, so being able to kill that is nice. But it's mostly there used for on turn 4 when we attack with everything and just get them low enough, we just Tribal Flames their face and they die. It's also really nice if they're at 10 and we happen to have 2 of them, we can win on turn 4 and just deal 10 to them and they again just die. So but that's it for spells. Next up, We got 20 lands. We had 16 spells and 24 creatures. We have 12 fetches. We got 4 Flooded Strand, 4 Windswept Heath, and 4 Wooded Foothills. They each get to search for their respective colors by paying a life. Over here we have 4 shock lands. We got Steam Vents, which is blue-red, Breeding Pool, blue-green, Temple Garden, green-white, and Sacred Foundry, red-white. We have 2 Triomes. We have the Savai Triome, which is the Mardu colored one, which is red, white, and black. And then we have Zagoth Triome, which is bug colors, which is blue, black, and green. These enter tapped, but late game can cycle to draw a card, which is nice. But usually we fetch these out turn 1, 2, or 3 to try to get domain easier. It just depends on how we want to curve out our early game. And then we're playing 2 basics to play around Blood Moon as much as we can. And then we have, you know, we max the fetches so we can get the most colors. Yes. So typically what we can do is if we have like a Regavan draw, usually we can go like turn 1 Sacred Foundry into turn 2 Breeding Pool, which gets us at 4 colors. If the Regavan lives and we are able to get a treasure token off it, one play you can do is go turn 1 Sacred Foundry, play the Regavan, turn 2, hit them with the Regavan if they don't have a removal or a blocker, and then you can fetch the correct Triome. Like if we have Sacred Foundry, Zagoth would give us domain. Fetch this tapped, and then use the treasure and the Sacred Foundry to play like a Scion of Draco or another one of our 2-mana threats at its like max power level kind of thing. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, if we don't have a turn 1 play and don't need to bolt or counter anything, really important turn 1. Usually turn 1 is just grab a fetch or use a fetch to grab a Triome, and then turn 2 we fetch shock whichever missing colors we need, and then just start playing threats. Usually turn 2 is like a big thing, like either Brawler or Kavu, and then turn 3 can either be a removal and another 2-mana threat, or maybe, you know, yeah, I mean, you just try to use your mana as much as you can for the first couple turns. The deck can be a little bit clunky because we have a lot of 2s, but we also have a decent amount of 1s to try to, on turn 3, when we have 3 lands, to be able to double spell, which is really important in this modern format. But yeah, that's the main deck. I guess we'll get to the sideboard before we talk about anything else. So for our sideboard, we are playing a companion. We have Gigantha. I think Gigantha is really important. We do lose some things. So Gigantha is a 5-mana 5/5. The companion says we can't have any cards that have the same like double mana costs in their CMC, or in their, yeah, in the mana costs, not CMC. So basically it means we can't use sideboard cards like Force of Vigor. We can't use Fury because they're both double green, double red. Can't use Seasoned Pyromancer because it's double red. Stuff like that. But we can use like 2-color stuff just fine. But this card is really good. It's like an 8th card in our hand, so if we start flooding or if they kill all of our threats, we can add it to hand for 3 mana and then, you know, play it for 5, which is good. Also, if we get Blood Mooned and only have like mountains, we can play this, and if it lives, next turn we can tap it, add 5 colors, and just play our entire hand, which is nice. But yeah, I have really liked the Gigantha so far. I did top in RCQ last season with this deck without Gigantha, and I was playing 4 Force of Vigors in the side, and that was really good, but I think with the amount of Blood Moon that's being played right now, I think Gigantha is just the better way to go. Next up, we got 2 Dromoka's Command. This card's kind of insane for its like mana cost, but you get to choose 2 effects. One of them, you can prevent the damage of target instant or sorcery. So against burn, you can prevent some damage. You can make your opponent sacrifice an enchantment, which can hit Urza Saga. That's really big right now. Or you can hit their Leyline Binding and get your threat back if they binding you. You can put a +1/+1 on target creature you control, and you can have one of your creatures fight another creature. So I've used pretty much all of the modes at this point. Against burn, you use the first one to neutralize a burn spell, and you can make them sacrifice the Eidolon, or you can also prevent damage and have your thing fight one of their creatures. Because sometimes, like against burn, you have issues where you can't attack them. Like, they would just take the damage, but you can't attack because then you leave yourself open for all of their creatures to come back at you. So sometimes you get to a board stall, which means then you'll just die to like them top decking a couple burn spells in a row. But this is really good because if they go for like a burn spell, you prevent the damage and fight their thing, and then on your next turn you can start attacking. But yeah, good against the Urza Saga decks. You make them sacrifice the Urza Saga, fight one of their smaller guys, or maybe their Construct token. Card has a ton of modes. It's really good. I've really liked that card. But this is one of the cards that was a flex slot in the main that I moved to the side for the Tarmogoyf slot. Next up, we got 2 Wear Tear. It's a fuse card. For 2 mana, you can instant speed destroy target artifact, or 1 mana instant speed destroy target enchantment, or for 3 mana, you can do both of them. So again, against like Hammer Time, Urza Saga decks, it's a really good card. Being on the play against like an Urza Saga deck and then just for 1 mana blowing up their land puts them really far back. And then, yeah, against Hammer Time, just hitting Urza Saga and literally any other artifact, it does so much. Like, going forward, I'll probably add more of these. I've really liked that card. Also can hit Leyline Bindings. Yeah, there's a lot of good enchantments right now. Next up, we got another one of my favorite cards is Hidetsugu Consumes All. It's a 3 mana saga. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy all non-land permanents that cost 1 or less. So you completely kill your opponents like Ragavans, DRCs. Force them to use their baubles or whatever. Against like food decks, you can blow up their cookbooks, their Asmo, their treasure tokens, food tokens, all that kind of stuff. Against Hammer Time, again, you hit their Shadow Spear, their hammers, their Ornithopters. But usually you try to use it as like a 3 or 4 for 1. Then the second one, the level up, or not level up, the second chapter is Exile All Graveyards, which again, against like Murktide, you can, blow up all their stuff and then exile the graveyard, making it hard for them to Murktide later, and any future DRCs they play come in very small. And then the last one, it flips into a 3/3. It can't attack the first turn because it exiles and then comes back. But when it deals damage to a player, it gets a +1/+1 counter. And then if it deals 10 damage to your opponent in 1 turn, you automatically win. That's not going to happen, but the fact that it just takes 1 hit and then it can get out of bolt range is pretty nice. But typically you use this for the other modes, and the third mode is just, or the third chapter is just another threat. So it curves out nicely. Next up, we got some counter magic. We got 3 Remand. 2 mana, counter target spell, you return it to their owner's hand, and then you draw a card. This is really good to gain tempo against decks that play very expensive spells. It's not ideal if you're remanding a 1 mana spell, because then they can just replay it. That being said, though, against like Tron, for example, if they go and use Ancient Stirrings to look at the top 5 for another threat, if you remand it, sometimes they don't have a second green, and then it basically time walks them, and you get to draw a card to try to draw either more interaction or some burn spells to finish them off. It's really good against the Cascade decks because they go Cascade, you bounce their Crashing Footfalls to their hand, and now they're like, well, now I have this card in my hand that's not doing anything. They have to suspend it, and by the time 4 turns comes around, they should be dead. So that's not going to do anything. Against Creativity, you time walk them, which usually leads to them dying on the following turn. Again, against Tron, when they tap out for a Planeswalker, you just bounce it back. Like, It's very, very good card, and allows us to play more of a aggro control deck post sideboard. Next up, we got 2 Teferi Time Raveler. 3 mana Planeswalker, comes in at 4 loyalty. Your opponent can only cast spells at any time they would play a sorcery, so they can't play at instant speed, which shuts off Cascade decks. It makes it so your opponent can't counter your things or kill your stuff on your turn, which is nice. So some decks like Rhinos and Control really have a problem with this. You can also use it to, you can minus it to bounce something, to bounce a artifact, creature, I think, or enchantment, to their hand and draw a card. You can bounce your own stuff if you wanted to, but probably not going to do that. But you can bounce your opponent's, you can bounce their Urza Saga, you can bounce like tokens, you can bounce Murktides, which is really nice, so they have to like replay it. And then the other mode, you can give your sorceries flash, which actually happened just the other day. I was playing a game and I Tribal Flames my opponent's thing on their turn because they thought they were safe from removal because I had used most of my bolts and bindings. And I went to Tribal Flames their thing after plussing the Teferi, and they're like, wait, you can't do that as a sorcery. I'm like, no, I plus the Teferi. So that was actually really cool, being able to kill something with Tribal Flames on my opponent's turn. But yeah, overall, okay card. I don't think it's like amazing, but it's good. You can also bounce Blood Moons. If you fetch for the planes and get like a treasure token off of Ragavan, or get a Gigantha out, bouncing the Blood Moon and then fetching for your other basic or being able to play some of your stuff can be really good, or countering the Blood Moon on the way back down. That can be really nice. And then lastly, we have a couple more pieces of counter magic. We have 2 Flusterstorm. Counter target instant or sorcery spell unless they pay 1, and then it has Storm. So usually at minimum it's counter unless they pay 2. So basically Spell Pierce at its worst. But it can't target like any non-creature thing. So it can't hit planeswalkers, it can't hit like enchantments, stuff like that. But pretty good for winning counter wars and stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much the deck. Overall, I'm very happy with playing the Tarmogoyfs. I might end up cutting one of the Brawlers for 1 more land. I am missing an Overgrown Tomb, which some decks are playing. And it only came up like twice in all the testing that I've done. But sometimes being able to fetch a 3rd land that gives you domain that is also untapped can actually really matter in a game where the faster deck wins. So that might be a change that I make main deck, but overall I'm happy with the Tarmogoyfs. As for the side deck, I will probably end up cutting a Hidetsugu and maybe 1 Teferi for more wear and tears, and maybe I'll just swap one of these over for another wear tear, just because like Hammer Time decks are really popular, and just leave the rest the same for a little bit. But yeah, so that's the deck profile. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to comment on the video. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and hopefully there's more of these to come, because we have quite a big group that's grinding RCQs this season, so maybe I can get some of them to do deck profiles as well. But yeah, well, hopefully this deck will do good this upcoming weekend as well. Thank you very much, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Bye!